Good afternoon, everybody. It's live at the waterhole time again. I will be your host, as I have been for the last couple of days. My name is Ben Coley, and I will be with you for the next 2 hours. And we will explore the wild earth and Africam cameras throughout southern and eastern Africa. And as we have done for the last 2 or 3 days, we have started out with this beautiful elephantine site down in Tembe Elephant Park in Maputo. Lots of elephants here today, more than we've seen over the last couple of days. Again, looks like all bulls. No sign of any breeding herds. Still never seen a breeding herd here, but how lovely to start with such a gathering of elephant bulls of different ages. But as always, this is live, it's interactive. Please do send in your questions and comments. You make this show possible, and it is an honor to hear from you, answer your questions, read out your comments, and debate all variety of things based on what we're looking at. And also, if you have any other questions or queries regarding African wildlife in general, I will, as always, do my best to answer them. So please do send in your questions and comments. But I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and if you weren't, I have no doubt that these views will help. Lots of elephants, some very happy impala. Look at the little ones there on the right. A couple of woolly neck storks I noticed as well. A plethora of activity around these watering holes down in Tembe Elephant Park. Lovely to see. These elephants are. I'd love to be able to watch these cameras 24 hours a day, but I'm sure these bulls do leave at some point, but they always seem to be here. They seem to have a general gathering around this time, but a lot more smaller ones, slightly younger ones than we often see. We've got a few comments coming in already. Joanne Mello, nice to hear from you again. Happy Sunday to you and yours. And Anushka Voters, you're also very happy that we've started our Sunday afternoon with multiple elephants. And I don't blame you. What a great sight and a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon. This one having a good sniff. Looks as if he might be eyeing up something in the tree above him. Lovely to see all the marulas falling here. That, I believe, is a weeping Buddha tree. So not one of the marulas, but the marulas are definitely dropping. Mostly green at the moment, but they are slowly ripening. And I'm certainly looking forward to collecting some for my own benefit and appetite suppression, certainly. A lone male in Yala having a drink in the back as well. All sorts happening. Anushka, you're asking if it's always the oldest female that becomes the matriarch. Again, I never like giving definitive answers because there are always exceptions, but more often than not, yes, because a matriarch is elected, for want of a better word, on the basis of her knowledge and previous experience, all that life experience that she has gained, and is able to assist the breeding herd in terms of where to go and knowing where seasonal pans are, knowing when the correct food is available at the correct time. And that is knowledge that can really only be learnt through experience. So more often than not, it will be the oldest female. Again, there will be exceptions where perhaps a younger female who is particularly well versed in things may take over. But more often than not, it will be the oldest female who will inherit that position. Good morning to you, Sandy Franklin 69, or good afternoon from us over here in South Africa. It is now 12:34 by my clock. And greeting everybody, including all of our wild earthlings indeed. Sure, the temperatures down in Tembe at the moment, but you can see all the elephants sheltering in the shade where they can, but looks like there's a nice breeze blowing, taking advantage of that evaporative cooling from spraying water onto their backs. It is surprisingly effective. I know there are many people, although I am not one, that enjoy a hot beverage on a hot day, which then promotes sweating, which then ultimately does cool the body through that evaporative cooling. It's a tried and tested method used by animals across the globe, multiple species, but it's not one of my favorite pastimes, I must admit. Despite being a tea lover, not often will you find me having a nice hot beverage on a hot day. The uncomfortable sweating that it produces is not is not paid off, or it's not a good trade-off for the alleged cooling technique. My mother, however, is a big fan of it, so each to their own, I suppose. Hopefully we'll get some swimming. Oh, look at this one reaching up to get one of those low branches. Are you going to break it off? They do say that on the assumption that it is a weeping Border bean, Scotia brachypetalia, there is a alleged traditional use, well not alleged traditional use, a traditional use that apparently it's a good cure for a hangover. So maybe if the elephant was eating too many marulas, maybe he does require a hangover cure. But just before somebody jumps on me on that one, there is no definitive evidence that elephants do get drunk off marulas. Yes, they're eating fermenting fruit, but if you look at the sheer body size, the body mass of an elephant, they would need to take in such an enormous amount of those marulas that it's not really physically possible. Again, never say never. I've heard the occasional report that a particularly aggressive elephant was found to have a high blood alcohol sugar level during the summer months, so not impossible. But the other problem is the elephant's digestive system is so fast, and it takes a couple of hours for food to work its way through, that stuff just isn't in the system long enough to be fully absorbed for its maximum efficacy either. Dark Main lover, happy Sunday fun day to you as well. And yep, great way to start off with some elephants and some inyalas and some impalas and some bird life and much else. Spot mustard 1983. This is an interesting observation. Maybe we can all debate this one. You're saying yesterday you were leaving Kruger Park around Lataba Rest Camp, and while driving to the gate, a lioness pounced from nowhere at your car. And then when you made a U-turn to see her again, she was very alert and wouldn't let her get near you, or wouldn't let you get near her. Why would that be? Difficult to say, Spot Mustard, to be honest. It's possible, of course, we don't know what happened during the evening. She could have been a little bit stressed, whilst many of the animals in the Kruger, particularly the areas around the rest camps, are very habituated with vehicles. Remember that only about 2% of Kruger National Park is covered by roads, or you can only see about 2% of Kruger by sticking to the roads. So there are vast tracts of land that have not seen vehicles. And if she had migrated in from a surrounding area, maybe she wasn't very comfortable with vehicles and she got a bit scared and became aggressive towards your vehicle. We don't. Maybe she was hunting something close by, and just the movement of your vehicle gave her a bit of a fright and triggered that response. We know that lions do tend to chase bicycles and things they're not too familiar with. So lots of possibilities. Maybe she had some cubs somewhere in the grass, and she was just that again, that sort of maternal instinct to protect the cubs, which would be for her a warning charge, a mock charge to try and scare off potential danger. So lots of possibilities. But yeah, I don't know without actually sort of being there and experiencing it. And unfortunately, we can never ask the animal for confirmation. So we have to sort of come up with theories. Again, if anyone's got any other theories, by all means, send them in and let's debate it. But always lovely to hear these observations from people. There is no better way to learn than to observe. You can only learn so much from a book. So the onus is on us to get out there and watch and try and understand and interpret these behaviors, which is why research projects and organizations are so important. They spend hours and hours and hours in the field monitoring all of this information. And the more information we've got, the more informed decisions we can make with regard to the well-being of those species. And we are constantly learning stuff. There are some great websites that you can keep up to date of all the latest conservation and science news, from everything from jellyfish to bacteria, all the way up to elephants and the natural world and climate change and space exploration. If you go to the right places, there is an absolute plethora of information that people are gathering. The more I think about it, Spot Mustard, from your description, I would be inclined to suggest that maybe she had some cubs, and she was just being very defensive, and that's why she wasn't very happy with you returning to that area as well. I don't know whether you noticed any mammary glands, if she was lactating. That's certainly a possibility. It is great to see so many youngsters here around the waterhole. Like I was saying, we're still learning new things and finding out new things. Only a decade or two ago, it was assumed that many these bachelor herds were fairly loose and unstable structures, without any great social bonding. But we now know that there is an awful lot more and communication between individuals. They recognize one another. There's a definite amount of respect and hierarchies there, and much stronger social bonds exist in bachelor herds than we used to think until very, very recently. So, again, more evidence that it's so important to continue watching and understanding these animals for their benefit and their conservation as we try and live in harmony amongst these great beings. I'm waiting for one of these youngsters to chase away either one of these storks or one of these impalas or inyalas that are having a drink. It's often the case as these young bulls are beginning to build confidence and try and show off to their peers and develop their role within that hierarchy. It is very normal to see young ones chasing animals away from water points, trying to establish dominance and so learn their limits. But everybody seems to be very subdued and tolerant of one another today. Of course, what happened earlier on, we might have had that, and the young bulls have decided to get over this game. It's always interesting to watch sort of the right of ways going on as larger bulls approach smaller ones. Often they will move out of the way. That little mud wallow there yesterday seemed to be a particularly prize area. We saw quite a few times other individuals coming in, and that spot was relinquished in favor of the obviously more dominant animal. This one seems to be standing his ground against the larger one, though, so possibly a bit of overconfidence. Let's see if he's got the metal to back it up. Although, in fairness, I think he's on the bank. He's not actually in the wallow. Hilary B, good morning to you from a snow-covered UK. I didn't know we've had snow in the UK. I'm not sure whereabouts you are. I grew up on the south coast where we very rarely got snow, but do have family and friends up north. My father originally from Leeds, and I still have family members in the Yorkshire sort of area, and I know they have a lot more snow than we do, and I do miss snow. Despite the fact that it's cold, it is very, very pretty, and I did get to experience snow in the UK a couple of years ago. This might have a little good bum scratch. And I miss snow. It's very, very pretty and not something we get to see much of down here. Yeah, I see now we're in the mud wallow. This larger one, you see both of these younger ones just watching him carefully, giving him a wider berth. Sandy Franklin, no, I did not hear about an injured zebra on Dam Camp yesterday, unfortunately. If it was yesterday morning, I was unfortunately unable to do much thanks to ESCOM. I had no power for about 4 or 5 hours yesterday morning. It only came on shortly before the live at the waterhole session for yesterday. No, so I didn't see an injured zebra, but I will keep my eyes open for him. If I do hear anything, I will let you know. Looks like there's a bit of a queue for the best spot in the mud wallow today. I feel like they should all be taking tickets like you would at the delicatessen counter. Lady Macbeth, you're saying that there's snow everywhere, even in Devon. Well, that my parents are in Dorset, very close to the Devon border, so I will have to check in with them. I haven't checked in with them for a couple of days. They would normally inform me of that. I'm surprised we haven't had some pictures sent through, but I'll definitely check in with them this afternoon. Apparently, there is room for two in this wallow. How awesome is this? I said yesterday, there are very few animals that exhibit such delight for rolling around in the mud and having a good splash around in these little wallows. Yes, buffalo do it, and rhinos do it, and a variety of other animals, the warthogs. But the elephants just look as if they enjoy it so much more than any of the other animals here. Big guy's vacated and everybody's moving in. Let's see if we get all three of them having a roll around. That would be pretty special. Well, there's one. And the Scrivota's indeed having a good old scratch. We're very fortunate to have the digits and our opposable thumbs. It must be incredibly frustrating when you've got a scratch in an area that you can't reach. It's kind of like those ones where you've got that itch right in the middle of your back or just under the shoulder, and it doesn't matter if you go over the shoulder or around the back, you just can't quite reach it. And that's when you need a good back scratcher, even a pen, anything will do. But it must be very frustrating to not be able to get to those areas on call. So I love it when the elephants have a good scratch of their ear. They must get so much dust and particles of things stuck in there. You often see them having a good poke around with that trunk in the ear canal. Slightly disappointed that these youngsters are not chasing away some of these very brave woolly neck storks wandering past. Oh no, that's not very sanitary. I suppose at least he attempted to get out of the pool. So we obviously had a little bit of an issue with the feed there from Tempe, but that was a lovely way to start the afternoon. It looks like we have gone to Juba, I think. Quite close up of all the lovely grass. Look at those beautiful shadows being cast by the tree in an interesting pattern. The tree of life. Well, whilst we have a scan around here, I'll be delighted to inform you all that last night was very clear, and I did a successful astronomy evening locally with a lovely group of guests. We had all the telescopes out, and we had some amazing views of Venus, the crescent moon. If anybody did manage to get a clear sky last night, the previous night, night of the 3rd, we had Venus right next to the moon, and last night Saturn was right next to the moon, so we've had a couple of beautiful, what we call conjunctions over the last 2 evenings. So we've got beautiful views of Saturn, of Jupiter, of Venus, of the moon. We looked at a couple of different nebulas and star clusters and discussed a whole host of cultural mythology behind a lot of the constellations up there. Lovely time of year now to see some of those very prominent constellations like Orion and Taurus and Canis Major and Canis Minor, Gemini. We saw Mars coming up, Cancer and the Beehive cluster. So many beautiful sights to enjoy this time of year. It's equally nice to see water in Gary Dam, although I have to say it's already a lot lower than it was a day or two ago. That soil is so dry, the water is just getting sucked in, and it's been very, very hot here again the last few days. And I'm sure there's a lot of evaporation taking place already. So let's hope there is more rain coming. A little bit of movement just by that blacksmith lapwing on the left. Not sure if that's a terrapin poking around in there. Can't quite make it out. Okay, it looks as if we have managed to get our feed back from Tembe. So I think let's head back and enjoy some more of those elephants. Erica Oldno, well, that's perfect timing. I'm not sure whether your question came through before I started discussing my activities last night or after, but glad to hear it's sunny in Cape Town. And yes, I did manage to stargaze last night, so we had an absolutely beautiful evening. Some stellar views, quite literally, and with the live views capable of with the photographic telescope that I have set up as well, we were able to see stars forming in the Great Orion Nebula and even in the Tarantula Nebula, which is a star forming region in the Large Magellanic Cloud. So incredibly humbling to be able to watch. Well, obviously not physically see, but to be able to see the effects of star formation in a neighboring galaxy, 170,000 light years away. And even under dark skies, that object, the Tarantula Nebula, is even visible with the naked eye. You can see it as a slightly paler spot, very, very close to the Large Magellanic Cloud. One of my favorite objects. I actually posted a photograph of it only last week, I think. And that was only from about half an hour's worth of data. So if we do get a little decent a stretch with no cloud cover, which have been hard to come by of late, I look forward to amassing multiple hours of data on that and various other interesting things that we only see during the summer months. Various projects in mind over the next 2 or 3 months or so, weather depending, but it is a difficult time of year. But say, don't forget, if any of you are interested in stargazing and astronomy, you don't have to have fancy telescopes. I do just as much viewing just with the naked eye and with a simple pair of binoculars that I use for birding. And it is amazing just how much you can see, particularly if you scan along the Milky Way, which is rising in the south. There are so many little clusters of stars there in the constellations of Carina and Vela and Puppis. The Southern Cross is just rising now around about 10 o'clock. So that area chocked full of interesting features, the Eta Carina Nebula, and many more to explore and find that are visible with a pair of binos. But no elephants up in the night sky, which I've always found unusual. There are suggestions that in the Swana culture in Botswana, the area either of the Great Square of Pegasus or the Keystone of Hercules, which also forms a square, there are suggestions that some tribes saw those box shapes as elephants, which makes a little bit of sense. But other than the Elephant Trunk Nebula, there's no other mention in African star lore that I'm aware of elephants in the night sky, which is surprising considering there are plenty of lions and there are eland, there are steenbok, there are springbok, but no elephants. I suppose you could argue that Taurus could be a buffalo instead of a bull. Right, I think it's vulture feeding time up at the Vulture restaurant in Victoria Falls. It's always entertaining to watch. Let's head up there and watch the chaos ensue. And there it is. That would always remind me of sort of the emergence of winged alates or winged ants from this perspective. They do move in a very similar manner. It looks like the initial chaos has subsided already. Didn't quite see how much they got today. Everybody now looking for scraps, I think. They have an incredible ability to eat a huge amount of food very, very quickly, of course, and quite a slow digestive system to allow maximum absorption of all of that food. Incredibly acidic stomach acids as well, around about 100 times stronger in terms of acidity than our own digestive system. We have about a pH of somewhere between 2 and 3 on average with those digestive juices, the acidity breaking down that food. Vultures are closer to 0 point something, so less than a pH or less than 1, which is highly acidic. It just allows them to deal with um, a lot of all of that food and to help break down that material incredibly efficiently. As well as various microorganisms in the stomach to help them sort of deal with the diseases and the pathogens and the bacteria associated with rotting flesh. They never seem to get sick. Amazing creatures and so important for our environment. Trixie Rose, a good afternoon on this beautiful Sunday to you as well. Trixie, you said you were gifted a telescope a few years ago. Don't know where or how to set it up in a permanent position outside. Well, it depends on the telescope. YouTube is your friend. You'll be able to search the make and model of your scope, and you should be able to find all of the information now. I use YouTube very regularly. There are some great channels that you can follow. Um, it's difficult to have a telescope out permanently just because of the elements. You don't want it to get too hot. There's the risk of rain. There's dust. Remember, you're working with sensitive optics. Very important to keep them clean. You can get weatherproof covers for outside, or you can go the whole hog and have a sort of an observatory with a retractable roof. With my equipment, I bring it inside when I'm finished and I take it out and set it up. That is a bit of a problem unless you're very keen on what you're doing. Many people buy big telescopes which are far heavier and clunkier than they realize. They do take a bit of time to align properly, particularly the older models. Many people buy them, and then, to be honest, because the discipline doesn't interest them quite as much as they thought it might, they sit there and they gather dust in cupboards, which is such a shame. But it's always a good idea to keep an eye on the second-hand market because there are many people, say, who get telescopes, don't use them, and then look to shift them on, and they're in mint condition, having hardly been used. So I suggest have a look at some YouTube channels, and that will help you to hopefully align and set up your particular scope. Mercedes Ben, you're happy that it's feeding time, or it was feeding time at least. Wild at Heart asking what does the lodge feed? Well, we had this discussion yesterday, and I didn't actually remember to go and have a check. But as I understand it from what a couple of other people sent in as well, it'll be offcuts and excess from the restaurants in the surrounding area. I've seen sort of rib cages and things. There'll be the bones and the associated flesh of the animals that have not been used by the restaurants. I'm sure there'll be some other bits and pieces thrown in there as well. But specifically what species of animal they're eating, I don't know. But say vultures are not picky. I don't think they are too concerned with what they get. I doubt it's a menu system that on Monday it's impalas, and Tuesday it's kudu, and Wednesdays it's what's left of a buffalo. I think they'll get what they're given and like it, as my mother would say. Hilary B, I've never heard of a person being attacked by vultures. Yesterday, when we saw the people bringing the food out, the vultures kept their distance, with sort of 10 meters or so. And as soon as the food was put out, they started to move in cautiously. And once the people had left the area, then that's when the scrum started to manifest. But I've never heard of vultures attacking people before. Eagles certainly, or take food out of your hands, the very habituated ones. But I've never heard of it happening with vultures. Eagle Lover, you're asking, I think, if there are any comets to look out for in 2025, going back to some star stuff. I haven't heard of any that are going to be particularly prevalent, but comets are a bit of a mystery. You never quite know what they're going to do and how bright they're going to be. There are suggestions that there is going to be a comet visible from here in the southern hemisphere in the next couple of weeks, sort of around about the 14th, 15th of January and onwards, very close to Venus in the night sky, below on the horizon. Um, but I think it's going around the sun at the moment, and we don't know what it's going to happen. It might get destroyed on its path around the sun. If it doesn't, there is a chance that it will be a relatively bright comet. So keep your eyes out for that one in the next few weeks, low in the western sky after sunset. It's also another one of the comet atlases, just like the bright comet for last year. But Atlas is I forget what it actually stands for now, but it is an observatory or research station here in South Africa, whose job it is to try and locate comets. Although many comets are actually only picked up when they're relatively close to Earth. That's what does make them a potential danger for us if one was to impact us. But we do have various safeguards in place, such as Jupiter being so large and massive. It deflects the orbit of many of these things going around the sun and actually protects us. So we have an awful lot to be very, very grateful for to Venus, sorry, to Jupiter for. But yes, it's I forget its full name, but it is another comet atlas. So your star apps should show it if you have a look. Fast forward a couple of weeks and check that western horizon after dark from around the 14th of January onwards. The dog main lover, you're glad the vultures got some food. Yep, absolutely. We were discussing it yesterday, how I think we all know that vultures are in danger. Most species, if not all species of vultures, for a variety of reasons. So anything we can do to help preserve and increase the number of vultures in the world is an excellent thing. So to all of those organizations and individuals who are assisting the conservation of all species of vultures. We all thank you greatly, as does the environment. Eagle Lover, I've just double checked for you. That comet it's called Comet C/2024 G3 Atlas, which notorious people who work with space things do need to work a little bit more on their exciting naming of things. But of course, it's all for cataloging reasons. So that's the one to look out for. So I'm sure if you search G3 Atlas Comet, you'll find something relevant. Oh, look at those two at the back having a proper scrap. One knocked him on his back. Sure, this one at the back seems to be harassing multiple people. Multiple people, multiple vultures. I see we have a person. Are they putting out a little bit of extra food? I think evidently the vultures don't associate that person with food. You saw they gave him a fairly wide berth. Shame I see a couple of hooded vultures there now in the centre. Always feel a bit sorry for the hooded vultures. They get outcompeted by all the other ones and have to come in and see what's left. But they'll always find something. Nature is very, very clever. They're much smaller heads, much smaller beaks, do allow them to reach parts that the other vultures cannot. So very much the classic pecking order. Very fastidious animals, of course, vultures. They always have that bad reputation, but they are surprisingly clean. I do some work on a freelance basis at a lodge on a reserve called Makalali, just outside Hoodspray, quite regularly. And the lodge that I am has a nice big waterhole in front of it. And because it's very, very close to the escarpment, we do get Cape vultures there as well, because they nest up on the cliffs, lots of whitebacks. And quite regularly we see flocks of many tens, if not hundreds, of vultures that come down and they have a good wash and a bathe, just cleanse those feathers after getting all that sort of rather fetid meat all over them. They do bathe very regularly, vultures. A lot cleaner animals than we give them credit for. All right, well, from one group of birds to another, I think we're going to head over to the ocean now and go down to Stony Point. And our multitude of Cape cormorants that are enjoying an ocean view today. It would be lovely if we could see some of these cormorants diving into the water. Of course, they do a lot of their hunting under the surface. Amazingly, some species of cormorants have been recorded going as deep as 50 meters down below the level of the sea, which is pretty amazing. Um, which, I mean, you imagine the pressure that must be on their lungs. I'm going to actually try and do some bit of digging around and see if I can find what adaptations that they have to be able to deal with those pressures on the lungs. It must be a crushing pressure on such a small little bird. Probably has something to do with the air sacs that birds have and the ability to conserve that oxygen and use it very, very well. But an amazing feat for a small bird, with very webbed feet, obviously, to propel them through the water. And often you'll see them actually grooming themselves with their foot on that middle toe. They have what's called a pectinate claw, which acts like a comb just to help them groom their feathers, keep them all in good nick. And as with many bird and animal species, humans have, I'm going to use the word exploited them over the years to assist with our hunting capabilities as well. I was in Dubai earlier this year and learnt all about how the Bedouins would work with the peregrine falcons to help them hunt out in the desert, and they would train them and then release them at the end of the season, and then every year they would capture new ones and train them for a couple of weeks to assist them with hunting small mammals out in the desert. And fishermen in history have also used cormorants, so they would train cormorants. And again, we can argue the ethics of it, but we are going back a few hundred years of putting a loose fitting ring around their throat, and the cormorants would dive down and they would catch fish. And the larger fish they would be unable to swallow because of the that ring would stop their esophagus from distending sufficiently to allow them to swallow it. They would come to the surface, and those fish would then be um, removed by the fishermen and put into their catch. So another example of humans working with animals. Let's euphemistically say so, to their own benefits, but more evidence that nature knows what it's doing, and we've learned so much just by watching and learning from how nature has evolved over millions of years. Joanne Miller, you are saying that Stony Point is your favourite. It is nice. So we have a lot of very dry areas that we go to, a lot of cameras in those dry areas, and it's always nice to actually see a little bit of ocean, something very, very therapeutic about it. Not an area that I get to visit very often, certainly. I'd say my knowledge of seabirds is very, very poor. I would love one day to actually go on one of these boat trips around the coast and down towards the Arctic, or the Antarctic, in order to see an awful lot more of these birds and tick many of them off the list. But something I haven't had the opportunity to do yet. But one day I hope to be able to do so. Donbury, you're asking about Maputo land, which is, I know what pops up on the screen when we go and look at Afrikaan's camera there at Tembe Elephant Park. So it's in the province of KwaZulu-Natal and refers to the very northern part, so very, very close to the Mozambican border. So that area is known as Maputo land. Maputo, of course, is a city within Mozambique, the capital of Mozambique, I should say. So that whole sort of area north of KwaZulu-Natal, very close to the country border, and some of the area within Mozambique itself still falls under this area known as Maputo land. I'm having to check the specifics for you, but it covers an area of around 10,000 square kilometers, pretty much stretching from Hlui, which is very close to, or close to St. Lucia, which you might have heard of out in the KZN, all the way up to the border of Mozambique, and sometimes, depending on what you read, beyond all the way up to Maputo itself. George, you're asking about the cormorant nesting behavior. They do indeed make nests, as you would expect. It's generally an untidy sort of stick nest, but they will also use various other things, feathers, bits of dry seaweed, also human debris, which we see also in things like the hummerkop nests here in the Lowveld. I personally have never seen a cormorant nest, but as far as I know, they will nest on sort of rocky outcrops. Um, and inland as well. Where all these cormorants themselves nest during the breeding season, that I wouldn't be able to tell you, unfortunately. But they do indeed make a rather untidy looking sort of standard nest that you would expect. Just look as well, the shape of their eggs, they have a very oval, sort of piriform shaped egg, more so than I would be used to seeing of birds that we have here. And if they are nesting on rocky outcrops and cliffs, that doesn't surprise me because you'll often find that those nests that are potentially in danger of the eggs falling out, they have that more sort of oval shape so that they don't roll so easily. And if they do roll, they tend to sort of roll round in a circle, as opposed to just rolling like a ball across a table. If you roll an egg, it sort of remains in one place because it's heavier at the top side than the bottom side, sort of anchors it down and it spins around as opposed to rolls off. So that's an adaptation that a lot of birds have, depending on the type of nests that they make. Catherine, you're saying you've seen that behavior in China. We were discussing with the cormorants and fishing. I don't know if it's still practiced today, but if you've said you've seen it, then I guess it probably is by some of the more local fishing members out there. It doesn't surprise me. It's a tried and tested method. Spas, you're asking about cormorants in Mozambique and whether I've been. I have been to Mozambique a couple of times, but I used to the same place twice, a little coastal village called Belém, which is sort of, well, it's north of Maputo and south of Xai-Xai. I think it's about 200 kilometers north of Maputo. Had a couple of beach holidays there. I don't recall seeing cormorants there, although it was many, many years ago that it was the last time that I visited. Having checked the distribution maps of the cormorants that we get in southern Africa, it seems that the Cape cormorant that we see here does go up about as far as Maputo Bay, so to Maputo, which is very much in the south. They generally don't extend much further up the coast than the South Africa Mozambican border. Beyond that, the white-breasted cormorant does occur all over Mozambique and along the coast, and they also have the reed cormorant, but that is more of an inland cormorant. Don't often see it in marine habitats. We see the reed cormorants quite regularly in and around the Kruger area, in by waterholes and dams and things. So, from what I can see, Spas, I think the only one you're likely to find along the coastline there will be the white-breasted. Penelope Kenyon also saying you saw some cormorant fishing in Hong Kong Harbour in Vietnam a few years ago. So yeah, I'm sure it's an ancient practice, but in less commercial areas, shall we say, I see no reason why the local people would still not be utilising that practice. Hopefully, it's done in an ethical manner. And so the cormorants do get their fair share of fish, and they can eat the smaller fish. I believe it is just designed for people to get the larger fish, which of course are the ones that they want from a utilization perspective. But I think it's sort of something that isn't done as often as it used to be, certainly. Rosie Adams, you're going back to our star discussions, asking about the T Corona Borealis. I assume you're referring to the little eruption that we were hoping to see. People were saying last year that I forget the precise term for it, but the star that's supposed to have these mini eruptions every 80 years or so. It's when a white dwarf steals matter from a red giant companion, reaches a critical mass and has this little outburst of energy, and that particular star seems to, like clockwork, go off every 80 years or so, and we will be able to see it in the sky as a new star. We were all watching eagerly for it because everyone was telling us it was going to be visible, but it never was. And unfortunately, now that particular constellation that it's in, the Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown, is no longer visible at night. So whether it has happened or is going to happen, I haven't seen specific reports of it. But unfortunately, it's not something we're going to be able to see this time of year. It's in the daytime for now. I'm sure there will be some people who have the ability, or researchers will have the ability to monitor it and capture the particular wavelengths of energy that are given off as and when it's happening. But I haven't heard anything more about it for a while. I'll have to have a little read up. Thank you, Rosie Adams. I will double check. Okay, it seems to be a bird-orientated day today. If I heard correctly in my ear, I think we're going back up to Kenya and Lentoro, which has given us some beautiful birding over the last couple of days. Let's go have a look. I've got some superb starlings, wonderful name for these birds. Spas, I see you'd asked me another question about the cormorants, about how long they are fed for and how long, what the incubation period is. I have to admit, Spuss is not a bird that I know particularly well, so I've had to just double check on my app. But just so that we're all on the same page, it seems the incubation period is around about 3 weeks, there or thereabouts, or 23 to 24 days on average. And the chicks will be remaining dependent on the adults for food for at least 4 weeks after they have fledged. All good learning stuff. I see. Rosie Adams, you're saying that the BBC is out in dark sky Wales, I assume, looking for this eruption. I will have to see whether it's visible in the Northern Hemisphere. Of course, my knowledge of what's visible during the day or of night is very much restricted to what I can see here in the Southern Hemisphere with different latitudes. It is a constellation more associated with the northern sky. It never gets very, very high here in the Southern Hemisphere. So if it is still visible, I'll have to have a quick look on my app. I'll set the location to the UK and see. But that will be interesting. Definitely, if you're in the UK, if it is visible, something to keep your eye open for. Um, it isn't going to be a sort of a blinding flash of light that you're going to require sunglasses for if and when it does happen. There's an area of sky where currently there is no star visible, close to that northern crown, and over the period of around about a week or so, it will look as if a new star is forming or being created. There will be a pinprick of light that gets brighter and brighter and brighter. It's not going to be super bright. It'll get to around one of the brighter stars in the night sky, very similar to Spica, which is the bright star in um, Virgo, also just a little bit brighter maybe than the North Star. And it'll hang around for a week or two and then it'll slowly fade out again. So yeah, let me have a look and see if I can find out whether that constellation would be visible in the Northern Hemisphere for you. Give me a moment. Ah, lovely little unstriped ground squirrel that we've been seeing the last few days. Very, very cute, these things. Right, Rosie Adams, I did have a quick look for you. It's going to be very, very, very low on the horizon, but not impossible to see just after dark with the right equipment. So it's just above the horizon after dark. So around about 6 o'clock in the evening, up as 5 in the evening. But of course, in midwinter in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm not quite sure what time sunset is. I imagine it's very early with daylight savings. So yeah, low on the western horizon. Uh, just after sunset, it might still be possible to get a glimpse of it. So I can understand why people are out in force in that case. Rosie Adams, I assume you're enjoying the colours of those superb starlings. And also Spuss, one of your favourite starling species. But yeah, very much a birding focused day thus far. But who knows what else may arrive. And Dark Main Lover, I'm glad you are enjoying the show as well and hopefully learning something new. Looks like something gave our squirrel a bit of a fright. Oh, he's having a drink. Cute. Those massive whiskers. Super sensitive organs, those whiskers, or vibrissae, as they're more technically known. Fascinating how they work. Right at the base of those whiskers is a little pool filled with liquid, and those vibrations are that are picked up by the whiskers are very or much better translated through a viscous substance, a liquid, than they would be through air. So that's all connected to bundles of nerve cells, and the slightest little twitches of those whiskers, magnified by that little blood-based fluid. I don't want to call it an organ, but a fluid area that the whiskers are set into. And all of that tiny, tiny little bits of information will be processed by the brain. Debbie Thomas, I'm glad you and your husband are having a relaxing afternoon and enjoying the show. It's been a very therapeutic show today with elephants lolling in the mud, lots of nice birding, and these little squirrels have really stolen the show for me over the last couple of days. Feasting on one of the acacia pods, it looks like something from an umbrella thorn, or very, very similar. Those twisted, spiraling seed pods, where the original Latin name Acacia tortilis comes from. The tortilis referring to those twisted seed pods. Actually getting some nice ambient bird call sounds today as well, which I wasn't yesterday for some reason. I would love to be able to identify them for you, but say, having not been to this area, I will be a bit lost. I did have a look at a bird list from the Rift Valley area the other day, or earlier today, sort of in preparation, thinking we might be back at Ventore again. And there are quite a few birds on there that I've never heard of. I always find it a bit off-putting. It's like go back to England. I don't know the bird calls in England. Here in the Lowveld, I can go out and I can identify lots of birds just by sound, and it makes me feel very much part of the environment and merged in nature and connected with it. And I find it a bit disconcerting when I go somewhere I hear all these and unsure exactly what they are. Deb Davis, you're saying in the eastern United States, you've got quite a few non-native European starlings which are proving to be pests and are not the most attractive. We also get European starlings here in South Africa as well that have been introduced or have found their way down here from Europe, one assumes. So we do see them quite often down in the Cape area. I don't think I've seen them here in the Lowveld. Funny feeling I may have seen them in close to Nelspruit in Bombella at some point, but not in huge numbers just yet. But these are not the superb starlings. We're now looking at the Rupal starlings with a pale eye and that beautiful purpley blue sheen, thanks to the layers of keratin that are reflecting that light through air pockets and causing it to shimmer as the angle changes. Beautiful iridescence we see on many birds here. I remember going down the rabbit hole of trying to find out more about iridescence a few years ago and why we have things like particularly the starlings. What would be the benefits of such an obvious shimmery coat? Because it would make you more obvious to your predators as well. Um, One of the things I thought, well, perhaps it's something to do with heat regulation. Does it reflect heat? Does it help keep them cool in the hot African sunshine? But it seems somebody did do a study on that and discovered that actually the presence of iridescent feathers actually slightly increases the amount of heat, possibly because of the structure of the keratin and the layers of keratin trapping some of that air more so than it would be otherwise. So then I thought, well, it's very strange. Why would you have iridescence that makes you hotter in an already hot area? And the best explanation that I could come up with or that I found was that it was actually more of a communication device and it helped birds that flock together in great numbers, which of course starlings well known to do, the murmurations of starlings well known in the UK region and in the northern parts of the world where starlings mass in thousands and thousands and they create those beautiful patterns as they wheel through the air. It's thought that it actually assists the birds in flying in tight-knit groups like that because their eyes are so sensitive. A slight change in direction from the neighboring bird next door will be more easily picked up and allow that neighboring bird to turn in unison. So it seems to be that that might be some sort of evolutionary adaptation of iridescence for flocking birds to allow them to fly in tight-knit groups, which itself would help against predation. Catherine, you're also loving Lenotore as well, one of your favorite cameras. There is some great birding here. It seems to be our most prolific birding camera. I think a lot of it helps that it's so close to the water's edge. It's not a massive expanse of water. It's nice and shady, and we can get really up close and personal with these birds. But I agree, become one of my favorite cameras. We don't often see a great deal of mammalian activity. We've had a few impalas and we see baboons here, maybe an inyala. But it's a bit like Stony Point. It's a very therapeutic camera, I find. Some lovely colors and some unusual things to see. few more superb starlings and a couple of doves coming down for a drink. A laughing dove in the background, and looks like it could be a ring-necked dove or a red-eyed dove. Need a closer look to be sure, but it sounds like we've got a reptile down at Stony Point. Let's go test my Cape reptile knowledge. Ooh, beautiful. Now, I remember we've seen this one before, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. Is it one of the girdled lizards? Looks like it's in the process of sloughing as well, as we would call it, shedding its skin. You can see some of that skin peeling off. It's very interesting to see. Yeah, it's possibly a spiny-tailed or cape-girdled lizard, I believe. Sunning himself. Whether or not the sun actually helps with removing that other skin, normally it would be done by rubbing against abrasive areas such as these rocks, just to remove that skin. You can still see little traces of it around the neck there. Trixie Rose, yes, this lizard is indeed molting, although for reptiles, lizards, and snakes and things, we actually use the term sloughing, so S-L-O-U-G-H, sloughing, but it's basically the shedding of skin, or ecdysis, which is the word we would use when insects shed their skin to grow as well. It happens periodically, dependent upon many factors, age and diets and lifestyles, and obviously individual species as well. But it can happen a couple of times a year. It's just a way to keep the skin in good condition and bring out the new skin from the underneath. But definitely this one is slothing. And yes, Catherine, I agree. It's a Cape girdled lizard, also known as a spiny-tailed girdled lizard. So a few more people mentioning some of the alien invasive species around the South Africa and other places as well. Trixie Rose is full of grey squirrels, as you say, some in inverted commas genius imported. Yep, they are a problem in many places, taking over from the red squirrels up in Europe as well, which are quite rare to see these days. You also mentioned the house sparrows. Yep, they are very, very prevalent here as well. Having been out in New Zealand recently, half the bird species I saw over there were birds that I would normally expect to see in and around the United Kingdom and in Europe. So a lot of those have been introduced. Ah, sorry, Lady Macbeth, you've also mentioned the grey squirrels in Europe and the effect that that's having on the native red squirrels as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a problem, these alien invasives, whether they're being imported by mistake, they jump on ships, they're sold in the pet trade. Lots of reasons why it happens, but nature's very adaptable. And as soon as you introduce a creature to a new area where it has no natural predators and has all the resources it wants, it booms. Classic example, of course, being the cane toad out in Australia, and again in New Zealand, problems with possums and a variety of other things. Oh, I thought that man was going to fall in the water for a minute. That would have been funny. Although we hope he's safe. Um, but I think I mentioned this one before, but not recently. But a really interesting example of when species have tried to be introduced in order to control the population of an already introduced species. We see it here in South Africa, or have seen it with the introduction of the coccinelle beetle to try and control the outbreak of prickly pears, a type of South American plant which grows here and has negative effects on the environment. And the coccinelle beetle does seem to do a very good job in feeding on the prickly pear because not many other things do. They also tried it with the Captoblastus moth, which also did a good job, but also started feeding on the euphorbias, which are native to South Africa. And that's had a severe effect on some of the euphorbia population. So you have to be very, very careful, but sometimes it's not as easy as you might think to introduce a species. Ah, there's our little African penguins. I think of dung beetles in Australia when they first tried to introduce dung beetles from Africa to Australia to deal with all the dung from sheep and cattle from all the farming there. Uh, because of Australia's very strict quarantine and import regulations, those dung beetles were very, very clean when they came in. They didn't have any of the associated mites and things that occur naturally on them over here. And those dung beetles simply didn't survive. They very quickly succumbed. And somebody realized it was because of that symbiotic relationship that the dung beetles have with those little mites. Um, they need them to survive because those mites actually feed on the little bits of dung that get stuck in those leg joints, and without it, they get clogged up with dung, and the dung beetle can't move properly and ultimately succumbs. And then they realized this. They started importing the dung beetles with the mites included, and the dung beetles have done rather well. I'm not sure how well they're doing currently. I haven't seen any recent reports, but proof that if done properly and conscientiously, there is a role in trying to introduce alien species, but must be very, very, very careful. Just the introduction of one organism can have a massive knock-on effect to the entire ecosystem. Lovely to see some penguins, a couple of Egyptian geese, and an egret of sorts. I think he's got yellow feet, which would make him a little egret. A little bit hard to tell from here. Doesn't look quite big enough to be a great egret, but hard without any sense of perspective. Okay, well, nice to check in again down at the ocean. Let's head back up to Victoria Falls. Sounds like we've got some bushbuck, which we don't see very often. Very, very nice to see. You can see those characteristic spots. You see one on the left there has got a lot more striping on than I would normally expect to see with a bushbuck. I believe there have been cases of hybridization within Yalas, but the spots and the stripes, the mechanism to create them are very, very similar. So just slightly different genetics per individual. I can't remember the specifics, I shall have to go back and read, but I did see an article about spots on cats and that people had isolated specific, whether it's DNA chains or something that controls the the pigments that cause these markings on animals. Certainly, these ones up in Vic Falls seem to have a little bit more stripes in general than the ones that I expect to see down here in South Africa. Whether that's a regional difference, I'm not sure. As you're saying, this is the first time you've seen bushbuck at Victoria Falls, I think so. For me as well, they're normally very shy, reclusive animals sticking to drainage lines and riverine vegetation. I don't know this particular area very well, but it's unusual, certainly, as far as I'm concerned, to see them in what looks to be at the moment at least a sort of a mapani thicket. Whether they've been drawn there by the young leaves of the mapani, because they are very protein-rich leaves. But yeah, unusual to see. So I'm not sure whether there are any lambs around. This looks like a youngster, certainly. But lovely to see something a bit different on these cameras. I see quite a few more people mentioning these alien species. Trixie Rose, you've mentioned the rose ring parakeets that are common here, and yes, the Indian myna, which is always a bit of a problem wherever you go. Thankfully, don't see too many in the Kruger area, but I've no doubt that their numbers are going to increase. Rosie Adams saying green parakeets in Richmond and Twickenham areas of London. A lot of escaped pets that have bred and exploded in numbers. Yep, certainly it is a common problem. Leopard lover, I assume you are from Australia from your comments. They're also saying that Australia is super strict with their environmental regulations. And you've mentioned the borer beetle, which has become a problem and you've had to cut down many trees that have been infected. I've had problems with introduced borer beetles here in South Africa as well. I had some trees in my garden that developed all of these, they look like tiny little bullet holes, and we established that they were little shot hole borers, which I believe is also an alien species. So yeah, I agree. There's nothing wrong with Australia. In fact, it's commended Australia's strict biosecurity, and something that we should all take into account, certainly. And I hope more countries are become better educated and more careful with those sorts of things. I actually had a guide friend of mine who went to Australia a little while ago, and they were so concerned about potentially bringing in an alien species that they took his bush shoes off him because they were worried that there were so many sort of sickle bush thorns and other things stuck in the soles of the shoe, that the customs official took his boots and spent quite a long time picking all the thorns out of his shoes for him, just in case there was anything, any sort of seeds or anything that caught up in there as well. So he also got a shoe cleaning service. But just goes to show how important it is to border security there in Australia. And so, great commendation for them for being so strict. It is necessary, such as the number of travellers coming and going and the ease at which animals can now hitchhike their way into these areas. And do not worry, people, that marabou stork does not have a pair of broken legs. Remember, stork's legs bend backwards, same as an elephant's legs for that matter. Their knees are sort of reverse faced, although that's officially the wrist, don't forget, or the ankle, I should say. But definitely having a bit of a rest. And you can see the white legs as well. We were talking a lot about bird droppings and uric acid and guano and things yesterday. That marabou storks in particular well known for that behavior we call urohydrosis, whereby they defecate on their legs, coat the legs in that white uric acid, and it reflects the sunlight and just helps to cool the body. Ingenious, although not particularly sanitary way of uh, controlling one's temperature. Erica Oldno also saying you've got shot hole borer beetles in the Western Cape. Yeah, they do seem to get everywhere, unfortunately. It's particularly those little things, the little insects, very, very difficult to regulate their movement and so easy for something so small to bypass border security and things. And as I said, with no natural predators, they can do very, very well, very, very quickly to the detriment of many, many other species. I think there's a little black crake who keeps popping his head up just to the left of that farmost stalk, a blackbird with a yellow beak. Wild at heart, you're saying yes, you know someone who works at Hwangi National Park, and they try and eradicate any Indian miners that they see. Well, say there are many places here that will do the same. I didn't want to get too into that, just in case anyone became upset with it. But yes, I know many places that if they see Indian miners, they are, let's euphemistically say, removed to try and ensure that they don't breed because they can become very, very prolific. Yes, there are more primitive mechanisms that we can use to control it, but that is a long process. It does look very odd to see something with the legs bent in that direction. Looks like it's had an awful accident. Well, now that looks to be a great egret. You can see the much longer neck, black beak. So we get a few different egrets here in southern Africa, the great egret being the largest, the little egret, which has the black legs with yellow feet. We have the cattle egret, of course, well known for following around herds of buffalo and also herds of domestic cattle, which have more of a yellowy orange wash around the back of their head and a little sort of fluffy crest during the breeding season. And then the one we don't see very often, but I have seen before, is the yellow-legged egret, which has two-toned legs. It sort of has black socks on, and then the top part of the leg above the ankle, the bit that you can see there above the water, is yellow in colour. Sorry, not yellow-legged egret, the yellow-billed egret. Apologies. Leopard leather, I'm unaware that if you're traveling between countries at borders, you're expected to sort of wash down your car to, I assume, to remove things like seeds or arthropods that you might be bringing in. That does seem like a very simple way of controlling the spread of things, but it's not something that I've ever heard of. I've driven into Mozambique, and certainly there was no requirement for me to do so. Whether it is done in any other African countries, I don't know. But yes, as a simple and effective, conscientious method to help that sort of problem, that seems to be a pretty obvious thing that we could be doing. It's as if he might have his eye on something. Are we going to see a strike? Always a lot more fish in these bodies than I realized. If those of you were watching at Juma a couple of weeks ago when I was there and we had that massive die off. Yeah, there we go. Did you get it? Oh, I think you missed. Massive die off of fish at Buffalo's Hook Dam, which was quite distressing to see. I had no concept that there were so many fish in that body of water. It was drying up. Of course, we see catfish flopping around, but there were literally thousands of what I assume to be tilapia. I'm not good with my fish, unfortunately, but I was shocked with just how many fish were in there in the first place. I never would have contemplated that there was so much life under that glassy surface, particularly during this time of year. Well, that was cool to see the egret have a crack, even if he failed. I think let's head back to Tembe Elephant Park there in Maputaland, northern KZN. And we've got about 5 minutes of the show left. Let's finish as we started with our elephants. then there were two, although there may well be others in the periphery, but see this youngster has taken up residence at the inflow to the dam there. You can see him having a drink, clamping that trunk around the pipe, taking the nice fresh water. Oh, I saw a brief flash of one to the left, so there are some other elephants. Oh, and one amazing one hiding behind a bush. But they do that, elephants. Very easy to drive down the road in Kruger or in any of these reserves, and you come around what looks to be a little bush, and there's a 6-ton elephant hiding behind it. Always gives you a bit of a shock to the system. Amazing how such a big animal can hide behind a little bush. Oh, look at that big stretch from the trunk. I've still never seen an elephant go up on its stand on its back legs to get up to the tree. I know places like Marna Pools are very famous for that, but here in the Kruger area, I have never actually witnessed that behaviour. I'd love to get a photograph of an elephant doing that, standing on the back legs, reaching high into the trees. Oh, look at the strut. My turn in the mud wallow. Get out. Oh, Wild at Heart, that's interesting. So when you travel by car between Belt Bridge border with Zimbabwe and South Africa, you have to get out of the car and put your shoes in a chemical of some description. Well, that's good to know. There are some measures in place. That I haven't experienced it myself crossing into Mozambique, but that was probably over 10 years ago the last time I made that trip. So whether things have changed, I'm not sure. Certainly, I've been to areas, even here in South Africa, where you're required to do that, or just walk through a little, um, sort of somewhere to just wash your shoes in a chemical that I assume is for that reason, to remove any pathogens that you might inadvertently be bringing in. And there are even reserves here where I was working as a guide and doing some guide training, we weren't even allowed to go into the reserve if we had been into Kruger within the previous, I can't remember how long it was, a couple of weeks, because they had clean buffalo there, disease-free buffalo, and if you'd been into a different reserve, you were forbidden entry into that reserve until a certain amount of time had passed. Well, we're in the last minute. Trixie Rose, you're very welcome. You won't see or hear me tomorrow. I'm not quite sure which of my colleagues is taking over, but I'm sure it'll be a wonderful show regardless. Deb Davis, I'm glad you've also enjoyed the show. Thanks for joining us. And Debbie Thomas, glad you have also enjoyed it. Wonderful to know that so many of you have enjoyed it. The cameras do all the work, as and the wildlife. But thank you for your discussions, your questions, your comments. Don't forget to stay tuned for this afternoon sunset safaris. And I'll be back in a week or so's time, week or 10 days, and we'll catch up then. But have a wonderful day, everybody, and we will catch up with you again very, very soon.